Well, the Chancellor has defended his decision to put up taxes last month, telling the Conservative conference here in Manchester that it is unfunded spending pledges and reckless borrowing that are unconservative, even immoral. Rishi Sunak said he wanted the government to be judged on the number of jobs it created and told party members that tackling the cost of living was one of the government's central missions. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary.
Well, you were outlining there quite a lot of roughage in this speech, but an awful lot of positioning. You felt Rishi Sunak was waving at the activists saying, I'm a true Brexiteer like you, I risk my career to back it, I really believe in it, I think it'll make us more agile, I'm a true believer. Some left feeling that he had promised them tax cuts, albeit when the country's on a sound financial footing. I think they were meant to leave very much with that impression. Interesting, intriguing. He praised austerity. Boris Johnson has distanced himself away from those George Osborne years at number 11. He didn't mention green issues. Boris Johnson, of course, mentions them a lot, and I think we'll hear him doing more of it in his speech on Wednesday. One of the other things going on at this conference, though, apart from the speeches happening down there, are the conversations, the murmurings happening behind the scenes. And to give you an indication of where one of the big themes is going, Steve Baker, the former minister, said in the Fringe this afternoon, we are all socialists now. It was a dismissive remark about tax raising measures by the Chancellor, and you're getting quite a bit of it. One businessman came up to me and said 40 seats in the red wall seem to be dictating our policy. Boris Johnson, no question, commands this party, but there are still big questions about what sort of direction he's going to take it. The worker shortages crisis came to the conference doorstep. Pig farmers protesting that a shortage of workers in meat processing means a massive cull of pigs.
The beef is the levelling up beef.
The Chancellor in his speech said there was no magic wand to solve that crisis and focused on defending his recent record tax rises to a party which is still reeling from the announcement.
Just borrowing more money and stacking up bills for future generations to pay is not just economically irresponsible, it is immoral. Whilst I know tax rises are unpopular, some will even say unconservative, I'll tell you what is unconservative. Unfunded pledges, reckless borrowing and soaring debt. So yes, I want tax cuts, but in order to do that, our public finances must be put back on a sustainable footing.
Levelling up. That's leveled up. How many times are you going to say this?
But some at this conference mutter that the levelling up agenda, designed to please the new voter base in the red wall seats, is dictating a new, more profligate economic policy, taking the Tories away from great icons of the party's history. You revere Margaret Thatcher. Is it still the party of Margaret Thatcher, people wonder?
Definitely not. I mean, what this whole Fringe event here is about whether the Conservative Party is still conservative. And personally speaking, I'm an economic conservative myself, and the party is no longer economically conservative with massive tax hikes.
There's a slight battle for the soul of this party, not quite being played out the same way as Labour's was in Brighton, but something like that going on.
Well, frankly, it's more polite than the Labour battle going on.
But it's big stuff.
But it is very big stuff. It is a debate about how we make the most of Brexit. You know, how we take our new freedoms. Are we going to deregulate? Are we going to cut taxes? Are we going to compete on the international stage? Or are we going to pull in and maybe spend a bit more money here and there and everywhere in the hope that that'll push the economy along?
Some worry the party's policy is being skewed to please voters in formerly Labour seats, now demanding better infrastructure and services.
I think what happened in 2019 is that the penny finally dropped that Labour was not delivering for these communities. They had promised too much for too long and failed to deliver it.
But you've now got to deliver.
We do.
And it's going to cost.
Absolutely.
And somehow that money's got to be found, and some people in the party might find it's a different sort of party.
What we are not going to establish in this interview where I am going to personally find all of the resources that we need.
But a new voter base means a new politics.
I think we have got a new politics.
The problem with higher taxes is if you go too far, you curtail the very growth we need to afford higher wages. But if you're not careful about it, you will stop the investment and the productivity growth we all need. And that is the key now to the Prime Minister's ambitions for higher wages and higher skills.
But you're saying this to a Conservative leader, a Conservative government. They don't normally need lectures on this sort of thing. Something's changed, hasn't it?
Well, I think we live in extraordinary times and a lot of things have changed.
Much hinges on the views of this man, who is dominating his party like few before him. They're even preparing a separate hall for the leader's speech. Other ministers, including his Brexit secretary today, make do with a smaller venue that's hard to rouse, even when the rhetoric is designed to appeal.
The long bad dream of our EU membership is over, and the British Renaissance has begun. As our great national poet said about the last Renaissance, suddenly all men arise to the noise of fetters breaking, and everyone smiles at his neighbour and tells him his soul is his own.
Lord Frost repeated the threat to tear up the Northern Ireland Protocol if he didn't like the EU proposals to water it down. But he will make the judgment call on that as on much else. A leader in command of his party as it finally gets to celebrate face-to-face an election victory some 20 months after it happened.
Well, Rishi Sunak was on characteristically optimistic form today, even finding an upside to the current supply chain crisis, suggesting it could lead to higher productivity. But faced with an economy battered by the pandemic and an uncertain future, is that kind of rosy confidence realistic? With me now, our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi. Well, is it, Helia?
Well, as economists are fighting it out as to what is the better comparison, the 1970s or indeed the war for an economy embattled with so many chronic shortages, the Chancellor has been delivering his own version of boosterism. So let's take a look at whether that high-wage economy is actually possible to deliver, because wages have already gone up in manufacturing, construction, in hospitality, with wages across the public sector and the private sector going up 6.8%. But there's a problem. The real number is much closer to 4.4% if you strip out all the effects of furlough. And the bigger issue is that the Bank of England are already forecasting that inflation goes above 4% this year. And that means, Kathy, that real wages are only going to nudge up 0.3%. That's pretty paltry. The other problem is that when I spoke to companies here, they're talking about, well, where is this money coming from that we're going to pay these higher wages? You know, whether they're big engineering firms or small retail firms, they're pretty anxious about being squeezed. And inevitably, they tell me, if they have to pay for a pay rise, they're going to pass that cost on. And that means higher prices for you and for me. And one final thought, Kathy. For a Chancellor that's launched the biggest fiscal spending programme in peacetime Britain on borrowing, it's pretty punchy language to declare it as immoral to use the fall back on the borrowing to stack up bills for future generations. But that's the crux of his problem. A fiscal conservative who said he's a pragmatist now, who's pushing against a two-decade trend that no Chancellor's been able to reverse. Because take a look at this. You've got a situation where back in 2001, debt to GDP was just 27%.